Hello, and welcome to A Fan Reads The Star Wars Vault. In this episode, The Evil Empire. Star Wars is a fairy tale, a space opera, a fantasy, but the saga and its creator are also part of and influenced by the real world. Likewise, the fantasy impacts reality. One well-known example is the use of Star Wars as shorthand for the Strategic Defense Initiative, a space-based anti-missile system first announced by President Ronald Reagan in March 1983. The only president with Hollywood roots also called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Congressional Democrats immediately called it the Star Wars Plan to imply that SDI was a fantasy. Lucasfilm, defending its rights, sued two lobbying groups to stop them from using Star Wars in TV spots, but a federal judge ruled the use acceptable as slang and said it didn't weaken Lucasfilm's trademark. The interaction of politics and Star Wars goes back further, though, to the conception of the saga itself. George Lucas's views has been shaped early on by the Vietnam War and by attempts by the Nixon administration to abrogate civil liberties and be above the law. In the early 1970s, Lucas also had been attempting unsuccessfully to make a movie called Apocalypse Now, which eventually ended up in his friend Francis Ford Coppola's hands. I figured that I couldn't make that film because it was about the Vietnam War, so I would essentially deal with some of the same interesting concepts that I was going to use and convert them into space fantasy. So you'd have essentially a large technological empire going after a small group of freedom fighters, he told Charles Lippincott in an interview before Star Wars premiered. After the movie opened, Jim Hoagland of the Washington Post, who had been a war reporter, said the story of outgunned rebels fighting an imperial government seemed to mirror the situation in Vietnam, and the battle footage reminded him of American missions over Hanoi and Haiphong. One French communist film critic, however, labeled the movie crypto-fascist. For the last 30 years, editorial cartoonists have had a field day using iconic Star Wars characters as shorthand, especially Darth Vader and Yoda, to make their acerbic points. But nothing cemented the saga and politics together more than the reaction in some quarters to Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. The perceived parallels were perhaps best illustrated in this excerpt from New York Times critic A.O. Scott's review. Revenge of the Sith is about how a republic dismantles its own democratic principles, about how politics becomes militarized, about how a Manichaean ideology undermines the rational exercise of power. Mr. Lucas is clearly jabbing his lightsaber in the direction of some real-world political leaders. At one point, Darth Vader, already deep in the thrall of the dark side and echoing the words of George W. Bush, hisses at Obi-Wan, "If you're not with me, you're my enemy." Obi-Wan's response is likely to surface as a bumper sticker during the next election campaign. Only a Sith thinks in absolutes. The political undertones of Revenge of the Sith became a hot topic for the world's media when the movie premiered at the 2005 Cannes Film Festival. In answering questions, Lucas carefully avoided mentioning the president by name, but made it clear that the same political outlook that had informed the original Star Wars was still at work. The parallels between Vietnam and what we're doing in Iraq are unbelievable, he said. That's it for now. Thank you for watching A Fan Reads The Star Wars Vault.